admissions counselor was interested in finding out how well high school grade point averages predict first-year college GPAs. A random sample of data from first-year students was reviewed to obtain high school and first-year college GPAs. Data is shown below. So here we have the charts of the high school GPA versus their first-year college GPA. We also have a computer printout of the regression analysis. We have the scatter plot that was created, a residual plot, and a histogram of the residuals. Is there evidence of an association between high school GPA and first-year college GPAs? Test an appropriate hypothesis and state your conclusion in the proper context. So the first thing we're going to do is state the hypotheses. So our HO is going to be B sub 1 equals 0, where beta is the slope. Remember, beta sub 1 is slope. That means there's no association between high school GPA and first-year college GPA. Our alternative hypothesis will be that our slope is not equal to 0. That means there is an association between the high school GPA and the first-year college GPA. Now we have to check our assumptions and conditions. The first one is called straight enough condition. In order to evaluate that, we're going to look at the scatter plot and we're going to look at the residuals. As you notice, the scatter plot, it looks like the data that was plotted is fairly straight. There doesn't seem to be any curve. And if you look at the residuals, they look pretty scattered also. So in this case, there's no obvious bend in the original scatter plot or in the plot of the residuals. The next thing we have to check is independence. Well, these data were not collected over time, but it was a random sample, so there's no pattern and there was no pattern in the residuals. We also have, does the plot thicken? And what that means, is there any kind of changes occurring? And in this case, neither the original scatter plot nor the residual plot show any disturbing changes in the spread about the line. So it looks pretty much like the data is going consistent. The next thing we have to check is nearly normal. And to do that, we can look at the histogram of the residuals. And from that, what we see is that it doesn't seem to deviate too much, and it's unimodal and roughly symmetric. So since those are met, we are now going to perform a linear regression t-test. So the first thing we're going to do is look at our regression analysis and come up with our regression equation. So here we have the dependent variable. We have our x variable, which would be high school GPA. Next to that is our slope, and above that is our y-intercept. So when I write my equation, I have first year GPA hat, because we're using that as our predicted, equals negative 1.5641 plus 1.3053 times a high school GPA. I'm also going to state my degrees of freedom, which I can find right here in our computer printout. Once I've done that, I can now come up to my conclusion. Now here, going through the same line of where my high school GPA and slope was, I have my t ratio, which is my test statistic, and I also have my p-value. So with that, using an alpha level of 0.05, our p-value of 0.0001 is small, and therefore we reject HO. There is strong evidence of an association between high school GPAs and first-year college. Well, now we're going to create a confidence interval, and our formula here is b sub 1, which is our slope, plus or minus t star, standard error of b1. Now the first thing we have to do is go back and look at our computer printout. It gives us the slope, which we used before. It also gives us a standard error of the slope, which is right here, the 0.1993. I then have to find t. So what I do is do 1 minus my confidence interval, which was 0.95, divide that by 2. I'm then going to use my calculator and use the inverse t function, which is why I need to know my degrees of freedom, which is 14, and that's going to give me my critical value. So now I can plug it into my formula. I have my slope, 1.3053 plus or minus 2.1 145 times 0.1993, and that gives me my confidence interval of 0.88 and 1.73. Now with that, I can interpret. We are 95% confident that the first-year college GPA increases an average of between 0.88 and 1.73 points for each additional high school GPA point. And now with that, we are done. And if you have any questions, please be sure to ask.